In order for Jesus to come back, the world has to end. It has to. So that means there's about 90 to 100 million people that are pretty excited about it.
That was Marc Maron, and this clip is from his comedy special, End Times Fun. He recently shared it on TikTok, and while Maron is obviously being humorous, the reality behind this joke is pretty dark. When I watched this clip, I immediately thought about reaching out to my friend Tia Levings to help break it down. Tia, of course, all of you already know, is the New York Times bestselling author of A Well-Trained Wife, which documents her escape from Christian patriarchy. She also writes extensively about fundamentalism and its cultural impact over on her Substack, and lately, Tia's been calling herself an evangelical translator. Here's what she means by that.
I decided to write my book. A Well-Trained Wife came out in 24. I had been writing it for 10 years. And I decided to go for national distribution because the thing that I had run from was coming from my country. And now we're here. And it's like playbook 101. It's every single aspect of it is coming true in our headlines. Kind of an evangelical translator these days where I'm taking the headlines and I'm really translating the roots. I used to say educating on the abuses of Christian fundamentalism, but we're living those. So I don't need to educate on the abuses of them so much. I just need to tell you why it's happening. Why are they so mean?
I am so thankful that Tia was willing to have this conversation. And honestly, it could have gone a lot longer. When I DM'd her, to be honest, I pitched a 20-minute mini episode. And of course, we ended up talking for almost an hour. As happens when two ex-fundies get together, we had a lot of fun, explored some rabbit trails, and of course, commiserated about the state of the world. And I hope you feel all the energy we had on the call in the recording. Now, I guess I do need to do one quick thing before the episode. Here's a disclaimer for the Christian viewers. We didn't pull any punches when it comes to the state of evangelicals these days in this episode. But of course, we both know that this doesn't represent all Christians. We even talk about this later in the conversation. So as always, I'll tell you to remember that if something I say doesn't reflect you, then it's probably not about you. Don't go blowing up my comments or my email, okay? Now, let's take a second to watch Marc Maron's full clip and dive into our thoughts.
There is a strain of Christianity that makes me uncomfortable, scares me, I think is the word. Those are evangelicals. They scare me. And I'm not punching down. I think there's 90 million evangelicals and about 8 million Jews. And I hate to give those numbers out because, yeah, it's possible. So evangelicals, and I'll tell you, if you're in here, I'll speak directly to you because this is a safe space. I'm scared. I'm a little scared. Yeah, because I didn't realize this until recently, and it's logical, but I didn't put it together. In order for Jesus to come back, the world has to end. It has to. So that means there's about 90 to 100 million people that are pretty excited about it. And that's kind of problematic to those of us who don't fucking believe that shit. Right? And a lot of those people are in legislative positions. And I'm sitting there thinking is there any way they're crafting policy to accelerate the prophecy? Yeah, think about that for a second. Not exactly humorous, but powerful.
I'm seeing now people in the mainstream media who, as far as I know, have no connection. They don't have the former fundy badge. And they're starting to notice things just because it's so blatant at this point. When you see someone like him share analysis like he did, however brief it was, how did that land for you? And what's the emotion you feel when you see that resonating with people in the public?
I get this weird, quiet gravity in my system. I'm on the surface, I'm laughing because he's funny. And, I'm having this oh yeah, it's very validated. Everything that was weird and obscure is validated. And then this gravity sits of the horror for it to hit so much critical mass that it is on a comedian's stage and they are starting to have inside jokes and vernacular about it. That's chilling for me. That means we are in so much deep water because this is not weird or fringe anymore. I've spent so much of the past decade trying to convince people that this was not weird or fringe. And now they're showing it's not weird or fringe. It's actually mainstream consumption. So, it's a wild feeling. It's very nuanced.
I think it was you in our interview that kind of took me to task because I said something about, now evangelicals are saying the quiet part out loud, which obviously I talk all the time about growing up and hearing people say things out loud, but we slip into saying these kind of catchy, pithy phrases of this unprecedented time where they're finally saying the quiet part out loud. And then you're this is very precedented. And this is the thing they've been saying. But,
Yeah.
I think what the reality is like they're now saying it out loud outside the confines of the four walls of their church.
You're absolutely right.
That's a massive shift. You know, when did you notice that shift happen first and foremost? We're like, hey, this is entering public conversation. Was it social media? Was it, political cycle? All the above? Like, what do you think was the catalyst for that?
It's kind of like a dueling tie between the tradwife movement, the rise of the tradwife movement, and that becoming like a crazy hashtag and having so much overlap in mainstream media. And then when Project 2025 hit people's awareness, and I was like, oh, that they're pushing back against it, and they think like there was this initial horror, like bipartisan horror over it. And then the Republicans did a really good job of making it seem like it wasn't the real thing.
This is a great group, and they're going to lay the groundwork and detail plans for exactly what our movement will do and what your movement will do when the American people give us a colossal mandate to save America. And that's coming.
A few moments later.
Like some on the right, severe right, came up with this Project 25, and I don't even know. I mean, some of them I know who they are, but they're very, very conservative. He's involved in Project, and then they read some of the things, and they are extreme. I mean, they're seriously extreme. But I don't know anything about it. I don't want to know anything about it.
And it's not new. Like, it is so not new. It is everything all of the survivors have lived through right here. It's definitely pre-Gilead America, if you're familiar with The Handmaid's Tale. And that's when I knew, well, we are so fucked. This is, it's here. I guess the third weave of that braid would be when they aligned with the tech billionaires. And I knew they were going to have enough money behind them to do this. They have Donald Trump's popularity, and they have the oligarchs' money.
USA, 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 USA.
One of the things that you wrote recently was this piece really reminding people that evangelicals are extremely invested in the end of the world. What do you mean, first and foremost, when you say that evangelicals are invested in the end of the world? If a non-evangelical is watching this and they're hearing you talk about this, how would you explain that to them?
Yeah, so it's kind of so baked into the worldview that it's at first tricky to unpack, but it's the idea that this world is not our own. This life is not where we're going to stay. It's in every hymn. It's in all the prayers. Your eternal body is your real body. Your eternity with Jesus is your real life, and this world is not your home. It's just temporary. That mindset bakes itself into literally everything from climate change to what you're going to invest in, if you're going to invest, if you're going to take care of yourself, if you're going to heal, if you're like, there's just so many things that are impacted by the fact that your worldview narrows into some sort of end of the world that ends everything. And you're going to be raptured out. You're going to be the escapism, the magical thinking, you're going to not be here for this, but the rest of the world is going to like drown like Noah's flood. They're going to be lost. And so it impacts how you see other people, how you see people outside of your belief system, and every choice that they're making. It really came to a head, I think, during the fires, which is when I wrote that piece, because there were people who were really surprised that evangelicals seemed kind of gleeful about the destruction in LA. They were getting worked up into a lather about, oh my goodness, it's wars and rumors of wars and natural disasters, and California as a liberal reprobate place is about to be wiped from the earth through fire. And they were happy about it.
The prayers of the saints are being answered. Judgment and justice is being poured out because you prayed and because I've prayed. How many of you have been praying for America the last 20 years? Come on, type a number 3 in there. Come on, type a number 3 if you've been praying for America the last 3 years. Guess what? This is not bad. These fires are not bad. These fires are good.
People were surprised at that. And that's where my work comes in, as I'm like, if an evangelical's happy about suffering, there's a reason. It's not random.
Yeah, I mean, I saw so many people, like, I still have so many friends on my Facebook that are like from that world or adjacent to it. And so, because I barely go to that personal Facebook page ever. So like when I do, it's like this hellhole of like a time capsule.
Yeah.
And I see those, like, the AI generated pictures of the Hollywood sign on fire and like verses accompanying them. And it's like, what are we doing? Like, this is legitimately insane. But then I remember, like, this is the kind of stuff we heard all the time. Like, we heard about like storms, shaking up a place, or earthquakes, or all these things taking place. And I want to kind of tackle this from two angles. Like, there is kind of two groups of evangelicals. You have the people who are, again, sinister, and they really want things to happen. I'm thinking like the extreme of the NIFB pastors that say, when there's a mass shooting, that's God's judgment being carried out on this country. But there's another sphere that you kind of alluded to, where it's the evangelicals who just are totally not invested in this present world. They're the people that sing the songs like "This world's not my home, I'm just passing through." They're ready to get their new body and walk on streets of gold. And so they don't care if the world is going to explode in 100 years due to climate change. They don't care if there's a bunch of wars, or all these different things start popping up. Let's tackle both those groups. Let's start with the people that have kind of the just non-invested approach, to where it's like, I don't care about climate change. I'm going to be leaving this planet anyway. It's not going to be around for long. Jesus is coming back soon. Like, all that kind of thinking. How much of the evangelical population do you think fits that mold or has that kind of outlook?
I think a pretty wide majority. Honestly, I mean, that's my grandma. Those are people.
The Gaither Christians,
Yes, exactly. Yeah. They're just waiting for Jesus to come, and they're be sure it's going to happen in their lifetime. They know things are going to get nasty. Like, they accept that because there's signs and wonders, and these signs are all pretty bad. So they expect there'll be some suffering. So when we have like climate change signs, they're like, oh, it's just a sign, and they just, it's like a self-gaslighting that happens. They just disconnect from any kind of evidence or science or reality, and they reformat themselves and reorient to, this world's not my home, sweet Beulah land. I'm going. Just waiting.
Right.
Everything they saturate themselves in supports that. So it's like, Hobby Lobby art with beautiful streets of gold and views of heaven. And of course, personal loss is all wrapped up in this, because you're going to see your loved ones again. Yeah. So it's very personal, and I think very heartfelt, and not mean-spirited. They don't really want other people to suffer. They are true evangelists in that they want more people to come with them. I think I have this working theory that evangelism is changing. It's not so much like, I can't even remember the last time I heard somebody offer someone the plan of salvation and invite them to come make Jesus the Lord of their heart, like the language I grew up with. It is all political, and it is all, you're either with us or for us, and it's Old Testament. So I wonder if evangelism is changing. But certainly, like, the church of my youth, the mega church, and the everything I knew with the Gaithers and Liberty and all of that, these are just salt of the earth people that think that this world is not their home.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of a coping mechanism. Like, you've got the loss of others, but you've also got your own personal look at yourself. This is something, I'd shared before we start recording, but like talking to a Hillary McBride, and, she talks so much about how people are completely disembodied from themselves, to where like any ache or pain, any problem they have with their body, they consider themselves at war with their own body. And it's like, this isn't my body anyway. This is a vessel I'm filling. And so you've got people that are just eager to exit this world. You've got people who are like, I'm not going to worry about these problems because I'm going to hit this point and I get to go home, and like, we probably all know, again, the evangelical grandmother figure who's like, any day now, I get to get out of here. Mine said that for 25 years.
Sure. Mine
so
too.
it's, it's like a thing that's like, it's hopeful, but it also doesn't offer any hope in the present, and it certainly doesn't drive you to pursue any action to improve the world as we know it, which is, starts causing some other problems.
It does. I think in my own life, it really nurtured passivity. I was taught to wait on the Savior, and like that's the opening of my book for a reason. I'd waited on a Savior. I'd waited on salvation. When I would meet with suffering, like I have this while we're talking, I keep having this image of being at Sunday dinner with my grandma, my mom, my dad, my sister, and at different times that would extend to my husband and then eventually my children. And we had Sunday dinner for so long. And very often the conversation would turn to, well, he's coming again before that happens. He's coming again before that happens. You don't need to worry, or you just need to trust God. And always the directive was to tamp down any personal action I might take to relieve immediate suffering. So I was never engaged in any kind of action or activity that might actually improve something. At least until we get to the place where Jesus comes, which was always my argument at the table of like, yeah, but in the meantime, is there something I can do to make this better? And they're like, you don't need to spend any time there. And they were well meant, but becoming a passive person, I will tell you, when I was writing my book and I was working with an editor, she said, you use the passive voice. This was early on in the process. She's like, your whole story is told in the passive voice. And if you're going to tell a memoir of your own story, you need to use more direct language. And it was part of my trauma healing because I don't know how to be direct. I didn't know how to take action or think of myself as assertive, because this really does touch everything. Your view of the apocalypse, your view of where the world is headed, and if you're going to be here for it, and if you can do anything to improve this kingdom, this world, touches every single aspect of your life, including your inner narrative and how you approach embodiment and healing and all of it. Yeah.
Well, I love the term passive for that group because I think that's a really good adjective for it. But there's a group that's not so passive. We've alluded to them heavily, and you've used very direct language to talk about these people in the past. So I'm curious.
I learned.
How do you? I mean, what are some examples? I guess is a better starting point. What are some examples of the more sinister version of, desiring the end of the world, where it's literally like, let's take steps to make this happen. Like the version of Thy Kingdom Come is we're taking this world by force and driving it into the ground so we can get to this moment that we've been waiting for. What does that demographic even look like? And what are some examples maybe in the popular culture that people can point to and go like, oh, I recognize that. I see what you're talking about.
This militant version of church, it as a movement took place as I was probably early 90s on up, as the church became more reformed and more Calvinistic. So Calvinistic doctrine is also very can be heartless and non-empathetic. It's very decided who's chosen and who's not chosen, who's predestined and who's not. And Doug Wilson's ministry began then, and it is still very much in force today. This is the same kind of thinking that's behind Allie Beth Stuckey's toxic empathy, and the idea that you might be moved to compassion for somebody is number one, you should avoid that. You don't want to be moved. And number two, you might change your mind if you exercise that muscle, so don't.
Toxic empathy can be used as an unclean spirit to destabilize the church. Allie, what is this doing to the church, to the condition and the health of the bride of Christ? This movement of empathy, as you call it, toxic empathy.
Well, toxic empathy can lead to an obsession with people pleasing. You put people on a pedestal and you care more about their offense and their feelings, their anger, their outrage than you care about shepherding your flock or being faithful to God. It means if you're led by empathy, then you are going to avoid the parts of the Bible that you are afraid will make some people mad, will hurt some people's feelings.
But it reflects back, really. I mean, you can go all the way back to Old Testament, which is important because they're steeped in the Old Testament, not so much Jesus at all. Then Noah's Ark, like the idea that he's building a boat and there's not really an account of him inviting people to join him. He's building a boat and kind of like taking satisfaction that the rest of the world's going to drown. That satisfaction that they're going to get what's coming to them is imbued all through many stories where you have vanquishing and conquering, and you have dominion of one group and the utter destruction of the other.
Yeah.
And that is part of the New Apostolic Reformation, and part of the Seven Mountains Mandate is this idea that there are humans who are saved by grace, who are going to be going, they're Jesus' chosen. And then you have the unhumans, and they need to be crushed, not in apocalypse at the end of the world in like the second coming of Christ. They need to be crushed right now. They're crushing people right now. But they feel very justified in that because they're like agents of God as soldiers in the military action. Pete Hegseth's, Doug Wilson's crowd.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think this is the piece that really stood out to me the most in your article, because it's so true. And it's the part, like I mentioned before we hit record, but like there's so many headlines that feel like parody, whether we're looking at stories of church abuse, like I literally covered a story just last night and started going down the rabbit hole. And then I was reminded that a lot of plot points in that real life story inspired scenes in Righteous Gemstones, which is a over-the-top parody of evangelicalism, but this insane storyline is completely based on a true story. It is actually a little less crazy than the real story. So it's like, it can be easy to get lost in like, this is too crazy to be true, when it very much is true. And that's why it's extremely terrifying, not just kooky and bizarre. And one of the things that stood out to me was you talking about people being deemed inhuman. And I don't think non-evangelicals realize, and I think former evangelicals can fall in the trap of forgetting how realistic that is. There's a clip I'll insert here of William Lane Craig, but just listening to him, who's one of the top apologists, talking about the slaughter of an entire nation of men, women, and children, and his only rationale being God told them to, and so if he ordained it, it's fine.
These people were due for judgment, and by issuing so harsh an object lesson to Israel, by using them as his instruments for bringing judgment in this way, he emphasized to them, as nothing else could do, how they were to be a holy people set apart for God himself, and not to follow after the pagan deities of Israel's neighbors, not to betray their faith and apostatize and follow these Canaanite gods like Baal and Molech and others. This was an object lesson to them to preserve Israel and the salvation of these people.
You start getting into real trouble when you start going, well, God is telling our country to go this way. God is telling me to lead my church this way, because there's no answer to that. Like that is the ultimate, for lack of a better word, trump card when it comes to, doing what you want to do. And again, it was like jarring again for me to like remember, like, if you're not on that team, you are not fully human in the eyes of so many people, even people who wouldn't necessarily even say it, but they definitely feel that.
Also fascinating to me that the antidote against fundamentalism is the humanities itself and the things that make us more human and expand our compassion and our empathy. That is how we resist fundamentalist and fascist regimes. So to have that thought stopping cliche of God's on my side and he told me to annihilate you, like, I think they think we're supposed to just accept it because they think they have God on their side without any evidence of having actually Jesus on their side or reason, sense, policy, rights, any of that. It's to our own ruin that we've allowed them to take this much power, that we haven't worked on critical thinking ourselves so that we would be more receptive to listening to science and evidence and testimony and warnings. Like groups, we have a real education dearth. We have things that are harming our humanity that we've played a part in. But I watched one of the clips about the philosopher who his biggest concern was the soldiers. And the toll that it was taking on the soldiers more so than the dead people. And I haven't quite formulated language for that yet. Like, okay, probably both, but there's this both and like there's some dehumanizing, when you're involved in killing for God, there's a hit to your humanity when you do that. But, to say that it's more than the person who died, I'm going to have to hold that for a little bit. And, how?
It's one of the hardest things doing commentary on some of this stuff is like, it's like, where do you find the words to explain Because and again, it's I feel so far removed from so much of it. Like I can put myself, and I often have to put myself back in the shoes of what would I have thought then, or what would I have thought, or what would I have heard then if I was in the church service after such and such a thing happened. But it like feels so fuzzy and foreign. It's like tuning into some obscure cable channel where it's like I can kind of make out what's happening, but it's so weird. Did you see the clip? I think I sent it to you, but did you see when he was getting pressed on it by Alex O'Connor, and he says he asks him, could God ordain a school shooting and it be justified? Did you watch that clip?
I didn't catch that part.
So he pressed William Lane Craig and he said, if you can justify the killing of children in the Old Testament by God commanding it, could God ordain a school shooting and morally and ethically do so? And he really jumped around the answer.
It is possible that God could command something so intuitively immoral as walking into a primary school and shooting it up or something. It's possible that he could command such a thing.
Well,
it would be consistent with his nature, in other words.
Yeah, is it possible? That one seems to me to be plausibly contrary to his moral nature. But it is possible for God to issue commands that would override what our moral duties are. So, yeah, I would say that it is possible, but that's not to say that anyone would ever be justified in believing it.
And I was like, that's crazy that this is like one of the leading apologists for the faith. And he can't draw like a hard, like, no, God would not do that.
No, and there's pastors like Wilson and Pearl and gosh, so many in Texas absolutely would take that position.
Yeah.
And say, yeah, it is ordained. When there's a natural
would gleefully
disaster,
say it.
yeah, gleefully, exactly. When there's a natural disaster, or there's a big bombing or something, they say, this is the judgment. This is Sodom being ruined. This is that sadness. I mean, that I think it's fuzzy for me. One of the reasons why remembering what it felt like to be that is that I was only tolerant of that because I was cast under that spell. I was being gaslit. I was gaslighting myself. I was disembodied and dissociated. And so I don't have a clear memory of what it was like to celebrate that, because I actually never did. Because I remember being a very, very young child thinking, you're telling me my little tiny 6-year-old sins put Jesus on the cross? And I think I kind of checked out at that point and never really fully engaged in the way they wanted. I mean, I have had readers read my book and say, did you ever really believe? You sound like you were skeptical the whole time. And it's a valid point. The real me didn't ever truly believe, but I did certainly try. I did certainly try to numb as much as I had to be there, but I did get in trouble too a lot for trying to stand up for the marginalized, weak, and innocent.
Yeah. Well, now you got me thinking back, but it's also like I wish somebody much smarter than me could study like just the brain activity of former fundamentalists and who chooses to leave versus who chooses to stay. Cause like I resonate with so much of what you just said. Like there was always alarm bells. Like I wouldn't have identified them as such at the time, but there were always things I asked questions about. And everyone I've talked to who's left and is very vocal is like, I always ask questions. I towed the line, but I also ask questions all the time. But I resonate with what you just said of, I never really got past the terror of my relationship with God to where like every day was like, or in a good week, once a week was like me crying, thinking, did I say my prayers well enough to where I'm not going to hell too?
Yeah.
And like, it's really hard to look at the outside world when every day you're policing yourself going, if I make the wrong decision on this, like I'm going to hell. And you know that from the time you're like, before you can spell the word hell, like you're being taught that. Like I feel similar to you, and like I never really clicked fully into the system, but I think a lot of it was just like I didn't think I was worthy to be one of the chosen for most of that period,
Right.
And there were others that certainly did think they were worthy of being chosen, and those people are the Doug Wilsons and the people
They're
that
awfully cocky, aren't they?
right.
I think about this with the unqualified job meritocracy stuff, because like most of the people I associate with, if not all, they're worried that they're up to the task of a big audacious job. When they get a new job, they're like nervous. They want to do well. They're not sure that like they're really up for it. They deal with imposter syndrome and they struggle. And then you have someone like Petey Hegseth, who steps into something that he is woefully unqualified for, but he is of this mindset and he feels entitled to it. And he's going to step in and be our Secretary of Defense, wholly unqualified on every count, except he thinks he is. He thinks he is. And so that delusion clearly carries through all the way up. All the way up.
Right. Well, it reminds me of there was a survey that came out in 2023, and it said that about half of men that were surveyed thought they could land a passenger plane safely with air traffic control's help. So like, I think of that mentality that exists already just in the culture, but then like take it to things way bigger than landing a plane. And
I watched a
like,
YouTube on it.
right.
Oh, it's like Elon saying yesterday that we're okay because he's tweeting.
Right.
You know.
Xing, tweeting, whatever he is doing now.
Who needs government process and bureaucracy and established protocols and, you know, all of the things when you can just rewrite your own rules.
Right.
I mean, I think that, and it's interesting to me that this group of Christians, and it very much is a group of Christians. Here's some irony. I know you get this in your work too. People who push back and say, well, not all Christians are like that. And I've answered it ad nauseum. Also with like, it doesn't matter, you know, like how many Christians, but now we're seeing, yes, you're right, Becky, not all Christians, this very small window. It's not the Lutherans, it's not the Catholics, it's not the Episcopalians. They are not real Christians according to this one narrow group, and this one narrow group are the ones that are in charge. Yeah, I think we're going to have to take the word evangelical out of our work because there is a differentiation coming, and it was always coming.
One of the things I've observed that's fascinating coming from the independent fundamental Baptist background is that narrow line you just described was so strong to where it was like evangelicals aren't going to heaven. We're going like maybe some are, maybe if they got the gospel right, but most churches don't. They're, you know, evangelifish and like all that terminology people use.
Yeah.
And
the Korean people are devout Baptists to this day. They have been persecuted with the Myanmar government. They've gone into exile. They've gone over into Thailand trying to get away from the Burmese government. One group had heard of their plight, the refugees, and they went in to help donate food, clothing, money, whatever they needed. Their leader said, "Who are you?" Well, they were some Assembly of God outfit, and he said, "Let me ask you about your Bible. Let me ask you about your doctrine." And when they didn't line up with the Bible and doctrine he believed and taught, he refused their money and their donations. They said, "But your people are starving." He said, "Rather starve a Baptist than die a compromiser."
But what I've seen happen over the last couple of years, and this really started during COVID when there was like a big culture war about vaccines and masks and all that. I saw Paul Chappell, who is the president and founder of West Coast Baptist College, all of a sudden posting pictures with John MacArthur and saying we're standing with John MacArthur as he faces persecution in LA. It took some political advantage to bring those two together. And it seems like they're sticking that way. I'm seeing him develop friendships with Fox News pundits like Todd Starnes. I'm seeing him now promote people like Megan's book, Shepherds for Sale, and like really ingraining himself with people that he would not consider to be like of their stripe. But again, for political allegiance sake and for protection, ultimately, like to protect his own ministry from getting dragged down, he's becoming very friendly with a lot of these people and compromising, which is the thing we're always taught growing up, like never compromise, never compromise, never compromise. He's compromising to preserve his own work and ministry, which is really startling. And so I definitely see like there's going to be this like sub movement that kind of forms that like is very, you know, non-denominated. It's very interfaith, but within this very thin stripe of evangelicalism. Like you're going to see like a lot more.
I could see that happening
Baptist
for a little while. Yeah, it's very
They'll
similar
fight
on a
eventually.
wider scale, like
Yeah.
like with the Catholics, Protestants banded together over a single issue on this big issue to get to this place of power.
Mhm.
And you'll see these like smaller groups fighting for survival. They think they're compromising and coming in, but those people don't, they have long memories. They are not, those will be the new not real Christians,
Right.
at some point because,
Yeah. What would you
that'll
say?
burn.
What would you say to the people who are like, they are Christian, the people commenting, not all Christians, they're the people who truly, and I mean the sincere ones, like the ones who legitimately are like, this doesn't represent my faith at all. I don't see this in my specific church. My first response is always, if it's not about you, I'm not talking about you. Like, that's kind of my go-to, like, great, that's not you. Okay, then this, skip past this. This isn't about you. But what would you say to those people who are like kind of burying their head in the sand as to like the broad waves that are happening right now, like that are going, hey, my independent little local body is not like this. I'm not like this. I'm not teaching my kids this. Like, do they have a responsibility to answer for this other group that claims their name, that they would say even is claiming it wrongly? Like, what do you think they should do there?
My go-to is always clean up your house. They're using your name. They're bastardizing your name. And if you don't want to be affiliated with them, then you need to differentiate yourself from them. And I think it's a strong language, but I always say I'm not here to cheerlead the people doing it right. I'm here to expose abuses. People who are really passionate about correcting abuse and protecting victims don't have a problem with that. Even very devout Christians are okay knowing that there's a portion of their population that is nefarious and they want to root that out. And so they don't get hung up on feeling defensive about their faith group. If you feel defensive about your faith group because this is happening and you would like to protect it, it is your job to protect your faith group from these people. Outsiders cannot do it. We are the unhumans now, the degenerates, the apostates, the Jezebels, all of the people who are going to be annihilated. Truly, the people with the most agency are people who still call themselves people of faith, who still have the organizational structure in place of a church, to bond together and to do something to fight back. And that would be, I think, the most effective resistance possible right now. Is for, in fact, yesterday when I was talking about Elon did his press conference in the presidential Oval Office with his child as a human shield. And I posted underneath it that I cannot believe that people I used to entrust my spiritual guidance and care to voted for somebody who released so much crazy on the world that the running headlines today are that the women are going to lose the vote and we're going to turn Greenland into red, white, and blue land, and we're going to take Gaza because we want to. And then I said, unless it's the bromance that's to blame, and that if Republicans really wanted to do something powerful right now, they would say, election fraud, we need a recount. Nobody voted for Elon. It's like the inside house that has the most power right now. It's really on those Christians who feel like it's not all Christians to say, you're right, it's not all Christians. Here's what makes us different. And here's what we're going to do about this problem.
Yeah. That's a great analogy. Like, they're coming in your house and saying they're part of your family, essentially. If someone did that in your actual house, you would kick them to the curb quickly.
That's right.
And that's a really great way to put it. And I'm going to steal that moving forward.
Take it.
I'm crediting you now in perpetuity for any time
I borrowed it
say
from
that.
somebody else too.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And I guess lastly, I mean, you mentioned Gaza. I'm sure we could probably talk a little bit about that. But when you see people like a Mike Huckabee pop onto Fox News and say, I think Trump's doing things that are going to, be of biblical proportion.
I'm personally optimistic that we're going to see something bold. I will use this term, Maria. I think we will see something of biblical proportion happen with his leadership in the Middle East.
It's a very
very bad
choice
news
word.
when Huckabee was chosen, period. That was very bad news.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, where do you put that in your brain when you see him say something like that? As someone who I'm sure was inundated with Left Behind and, is seeing people cheering on countless millions of people killed in the Middle East to further this agenda, to usher in the kingdom, so to speak. Like, how do you even begin? Like, it seems like one of those things where it's like, if you don't see that, like, that's the most blatant thing that's getting spread. Like, what do you see? But like, I mean, what do you even think about that clip? I don't even know where, like, what's actionable about it, or like, what do we do about it? It's like, what do you even think hearing him say biblical proportions in regards to plans?
He means
for that
Armageddon.
area?
He means they're going to annihilate the whole region. And I'm still sad, and I'm still really sad about this, having watched this happen through the election, with pro-Palestinian protests and people who really couldn't bring themselves to vote for Harris because of genocide and the things that they saw wrong. And they put their faith in the evangelicals who want Armageddon to wipe the entire, like, scorched earth and build hotels. Like, yes, they want a scorched earth. Jesus isn't coming again. That's all fiction. They're going to build hotels. They just want the people out of the way.
Well, let me ask that, though, because this is something I asked Adam Kinzinger about. This is something I asked Sarah McCammon, who is the co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. So her fingers on the pulse of evangelicalism and politics. And I asked them both, do you think Trump, like, went into his original campaign expecting to drive on these issues to get the evangelical vote, or do you think it happened upon him and he's leaned into it? Like, do you think Trump is just, I want to make more money with real estate deals, I want to figure out ways to set things up, these people will give that to me if I lean into their beliefs? Or do you think the beliefs are legitimately helping to fuel Trump at this point? Like, is it chicken and the egg? Like, where do you think question. This is a whole podcast right here, but like, I tend to think Huckabee really wants the end of the world, wants Armageddon. Trump wants real estate in different places that'll be really cool to golf at. That's a match made in heaven right now. But I don't know if you feel the same way, or if you think Trump is really starting to get lost in the evangelical sauce, as it were.
Oh, I think that he's very deluded and very naive. And I think he went for popularity, and he went for what was going to get him in office the first time. And the second time he went for what was going to keep him out of jail. And he does not know what he's dealing with. He has no idea the amount of skill and strategy and power and precision that he is battling, or he's playing with fire. He thinks he's going to get hotel deals out of this. He's old. He's going to be like, I don't think we're making it 4 years. We might not make it 2 years with him.
This world is not his home. He's just passing through.
It is not.
Off to the streets of gold for him. He's going to put Trump on top of his mansion,
They needed some popularity. They got it. Yeah. He thinks he's going to get real estate. He's not. And the tech is going to change all of this. Like, the money is going to talk. This is me imagining. Okay. So I haven't really even thought this through, but it has been occurring to me the last few days that the Christian nationalists might have also shot their shot too far. And with the oligarchs and with the tech, with the money, they brought them on for the power that money would buy them. But the money is the one that's in control there. So there's a chance that this still backfires on all of them, because the money's always going to protect the money, period. And I don't think they're really into annihilation planet, because they really want a working class. They want an economy that will keep going.
Musk certainly doesn't, He
he's going to be, that's going to Mars.
Sure.
Or his little bunker down in the pits of New Zealand. Who knows?
One of the two. Yeah.
But most of them are not like that. And I think that it's possible that this is something only another insider is going to get. So if you from where me and Eric are from, you'll get it. The really nerdy, geeky Christian kid that was like so super strident and knew everything. Like, he was just cocky and patient, and he waited. And it looks like that kind of guy, that Russ Vought kind of guy, he's on top right now. And it's scary to us, because we know that he's legit. He really believes what he says, and he really will be that cold, and he will be that calculated. But he's always made the mistake of thinking he's really in control. He's really better than everybody else. And many, 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 many times in the past decades, that hasn't been the case. Eventually he gets his knees knocked.
No.
And there is a part of me that's like, please let him be humbled. Let something happen that cripples this cabinet and cripples these mean-spirited people who want to wipe the planet.
That is one of the things, that, well, I'll just say this. There were a lot of things about Harris that, in her political career, I was not a fan of, and some of that did come with her stances on Israel in response to it. Some of that came to just her stance on incarceration over, violent crimes. There were a lot of things like that. I was not a all-in person, but you laid it out. I mean, given the alternative, and this is something where I think former evangelicals should have been louder. And I know you were sounding the alarm on this. I honestly wish I had sounded the alarm on this specifically more. The people that don't want to see more death in the Middle East, and I mean innocent death, Palestine, even innocent Israeli death, all within this messy political area. The party that was voted in as the alternative to the person who didn't have the hardest stance on Israel, like a Kamala Harris, they voted an alternative that would love nothing more than to see that entire area just nuked off the map. And to me, it was a situation where like the less worse candidate, who was a lot less worse, probably would have, preserved some of that from happening. And
protected a two-state solution, protected innocent lives. There was no chance that Kamala is going to raise the ground,
definitely not going to turn into a strip mall, Right. Well, on that note, which I'm sure will leave some lovely interaction, I really appreciate you, and I know you mentioned you want to see these guys get humbled, and I just want to applaud your work in working to humble these guys every day in your writing. If somebody's listening to you, I mean, everyone knows who you are. So if they're listening, they know you broadly. But if you can promote like one or two things where you'd want people to connect with you as they see like your ongoing work talking about this, what would be the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, I'm on Substack the most right now, tialevings.substack.com. I'm working from a viewpoint of subversive hope to get through the next 4 years, or however long we have to face this situation. And I try to preserve humanity and insight as we deconstruct fundamentalism in our current headlines. So that's, if you're looking for like a deconstructed take that preserves humanity and isn't like hellfire and brimstone in the recovery space, that's what I'm doing over there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I hope it's not the last time we have a conversation, and I'm sure there will be plenty more to talk about. So I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, we should do a panel. I think we need more community events in the survivor space.
I would love to do that. It's definitely something. Well, I'll tell you some stuff that I've got in my mind in a second, but I definitely think that would be a great idea.